第8章，隋唐制度革命，独相到群相，差遣宰相与门下分帛的宪制高峰。Chapter 8 The Institutional Revolution of the Sui and Tang. From single chancellor to collective chancellery, ad hoc premiership, and the Mengxia province's veto power as the apex of constitutionalism. 第1节从独相到群相，唐代宰相制度的结构性转型。Section 1 From single chancellor to collective chancellery. The structural transformation of the Tang premier system. The Sui dynasty ended the North-South division, re-established unified centralization, reorganized administration, law, and finance, and weakened local magnates and military forces, laying the foundation for the institutional peak of the Tang. Building on Sui institutions, the Tang completed the most profound and constitutionally significant structural revolution in China's premier system, from the single or dual chancellor system of the Qin, Han, Wei, and Jin to a formal collective chancellery system. Instead of one or two premiers, a group of officials jointly deliberated, decided, and checked one another institutionally. ELIMINATING, the possibility of one-man dictatorship or USUR, PATION by powerful ministers, achieving decentralized power, collective leadership, and mutual supervision. This transformation marked the institutional apex of ancient China's traditions of limited and divided power, shifting the premier system from personal power to collective institution, and from ruler-minister rivalry to institutional checks and balances. The Tang collective chancellery dispersed power through group decision-making, forming a stable balance with imperial authority, representing the mature form of China's premier system, Zhu Zongbin, a study of the premier system in the Han, Wei, Jing, Northern and Southern dynasties, 1990, p. 267. Combined with the Council of State, Zhengshitang, system, it constructed a procedural and institutionalized power-checking structure, Yanggenguang, the Chinese premier system, 1985, p. 112. 第2节同中书门下平章事，宰相由固定官向临时差遣的转变。Section 2 通中书门下平章事。The shift from fixed premiership to ad hoc appointment. Complementary to collective chancellery, the Tang creatively made the premiership ad hoc, temporary and non-permanent. The Tang had no fixed office titled chancellor. The core officials who held premier authority and joined Council of State deliberations were those granted the honorific titles Tongzhongshu Mengxia Sanpin or Tongzhongshu Mengxia Pingzangshi. Rank in their substantive posts did not determine premier status. They were temporarily appointed by the emperor, joined the council with supplementary titles, deliberated collectively, and rotated regularly. The premiership was no longer lifelong, fixed, or hereditary, but an ad hoc, collective, and rotating office, institutionally preventing long-term monopoly, factionalism, and usurpation of imperial authority. The ad hoc premiership achieved office rotation and power dispersion, further strengthening institutional checks. Wu Zonggu, Collected Essays on Tang Political Institutions, 1992 p. 73. The ad hoc system broke rigid official hierarchy, keeping chancellery power under dual constraints of imperial authority and institutions. The central power structure of the Sui and Tang and its evolution, 1995年 p. 156。第3节唐代门下分帛审议，前目甚赞的事前制衡与制度精髓。Section 3 The Fengbo sealback and reject power of the Tang Mengxia province. The preemptive check and institutional essence praised by Qian Mu. The core constitutional design of the Tang 3 departments and 6 ministries lay in the procedural cycle. Zhongshu, Chancellery, issues decrees. Menxia, Chamberlain, reviews and vetoes. Shangshu, Department of State Affairs, executes. Of greatest value for limited government, and most highly praised by Qianmu, WAS the review and veto power of the Mengxia province. In traditional Chinese government and politics, Qianmu clearly states that the reason Tang politics formed a rationally balanced, non-arbitrary governance structure lay precisely in the Fengbo system, which created a legal check and rigid veto mechanism for imperial action, preventing the ruler's will from being directly and unilaterally transformed into state law. Qianmu, 1955 p. 56. Fengbo comprised 2 legal powers, Feng sealback and Bo reject correct. Feng meant returning an edict drafted by Zhongshu and approved by the emperor, blocking its issuance. Bo meant comprehensively reviewing the edict's legality, rationality, precedent, and popular sentiment, correcting errors, and demanding revision or revocation. Fengbo was not mere remonstrance, but a legally effective, preemptive veto. An imperial edict not reviewed and approved by Mengxia was institutionally invalid and unenforceable. Qianmu repeatedly emphasized, the essence of the Tang three-department system lay not in Zongshu drafting or Shangshu executing, but in Mengxia Fengbo. With Fengbo, imperial power was restrained. Without it, power easily became abusive. This marked a crucial shift of traditional politics from autocracy to procedural governance. Qianmu, 1955P56. As documented in Zhu Zongbin's A Study of the Premier System, Fengbo review originated in the Weijin Northern-Southern dynasties. The Caowei established division between Zongshu drafting and Mengxia consultation. Western Jin formalized Mengxia powers. Fengbo became rigid convention in the Eastern Jin and Southern dynasties, and developed in parallel in the Northern dynasties. Integrated by the Sui, it was fully institutionalized, regularized, and specialized in the Tang, with palace attendants, gentlemen of the Yellow Gate, and palace secretaries as dedicated Fengbo officials, forming a stable preemptive review system. 1990年308到310页 The Tang elevated this long-evolving convention to state administrative law. The Tang Six statutes explicitly defined Mengxia as responsible for issuing and receiving imperial orders, memorializing and correcting errors, institutionally confirming Fengbo as an IND, ISP, ENSA, BLE step in central governance. The constitutional functions of Fengbo are clear. First, it filtered personal edicts, internal decrees, and unapproved orders, blocking private commands from bypassing central institutions. Second, it checked Zhongshu decision-making, preventing chancellery abuse or hasty judgments. Third, independent review ensured prudent decrees consistent with law and public opinion, reducing oppressive and reckless measures. Qianmu regarded it as the highest model. OF procedural limitation, institutional checks, and rational governance in traditional China, constraining imperial power at the source and requiring deliberation, correction, and refinement before decisions took effect. EMBODYING, highly mature institutional rationality in traditional Chinese politics. 第四节，唐代宰相附属程序合法性要件与制度源流，祝总兵考证。Section 4, Tang Premier Countersignature. Procedural legitimacy and institutional origins, Zhu Zongbin's research. Parallel to Fengbo review, and jointly forming the basis for valid Tang decrees, was the principle of premier countersignature. Tang institutions clearly required that major state affairs and formal edicts must be drafted by Zhongshu, deliberated and signed collectively by premiers, and reviewed by Mengxia to possess full legal force. An imperial order without premier countersignature was procedurally incomplete, lacked public legal validity, and could be refused by all ministries. Countersignature was not a formal signature, but legal confirmation, OF decision legitimacy and political responsibility, an indispensable intermediary for transforming imperial will into state law. Based on systematic research, Zhu Zongbin confirms that premier countersignature, as an institutional convention, originated in the Weijin Northern-Southern dynasties, took shape in the Sui, and matured and rigidified in the Tang. It was not the creation of a single ruler or minister. Zhu Zongbin. 1990年310到312页 From the Wei onward, division among the THR-EE departments gradually clarified, and edicts required consultation and signature by premier organs to be valid, becoming political convention. The Sui's parallel three departments further enforced procedural requirements that edicts must be signed by premiers. In the Tang, with the establishment of the Council of State, premiers deliberated collectively and signed jointly, making countersignature a necessary and legal prerequisite for valid edicts, forming a complete procedural chain with Fengbo and imperial approval. The core legal principle of Tang countersignature was, imperial power could not legislate alone. DECREE legitimacy derived from procedural completeness and central collective deliberation. The emperor was head of state, not direct legislator. Decisions required premier consultation and signed endorsement to represent court will and possess universal binding force. Without countersignature, there was no collective deliberation. Without deliberation, there was no valid law. This principle permeated early Tang political practice, becoming a vital institutional pillar restraining imperial power, regulating central governance and preventing arbitrariness. Qianmu also highly affirmed the complementary value of Tang countersignature and Fengbo, holding that together they constructed a political structure of limited imperial power, procedural supremacy, and institutional checks. The emperor, though revered, could not issue orders arbitrarily. Premiers, though powerful, could not act selfishly. Decisions followed institutions, emerged from public discussion, and were refined through review, forming a rare, rational, procedural, and balanced governance form in ancient Chinese history. Qianmu, 1955, p. 57, Premier countersignature and Fengbo review mutually reinforced each other, laying the foundation for Tang procedural constitutionalism and providing a classic paradigm for power restraint mechanisms in traditional China.